Imagine being executed for wearing the wrong color. Sound insane? Ancient civilizations had laws so bizarre, they'd make modern Karen complaints look reasonable. Today, I'm revealing 7 laws that actually existed, and the last one involves something you probably did this morning. Law 1. The deadly fashion police. Picture this. You're walking down the street in ancient Rome, minding your own business, when suddenly guards surround you. Your crime? The shirt you're wearing. Not because it's ugly, because of its color. But this wasn't just any color violation. See, Romans were obsessed with status symbols. Your clothes, your house, your chariot, everything had to match your social rank. Step out of line, and the consequences were swift and brutal. There was one particular shade that drove the empire absolutely insane. It was more valuable than gold, more coveted than land, and more dangerous than poison. Merchants would travel thousands of miles just to get their hands on it. But here's where it gets interesting. This color required the sacrifice of thousands of sea creatures. Tiny shells were crushed by the millions, their purple blood extracted drop by precious drop. The process was so labor-intensive that a single garment could cost more than a house. The wealthy became addicted to flaunting this color. They'd wear it to markets, to temples, even to bed. It became a symbol of ultimate power and prestige. But then Emperor Nero stepped in. He was paranoid, ruthless, and absolutely obsessed with control. He couldn't stand seeing commoners wearing what he considered royal colors. So he created a law so extreme, it made wearing the wrong outfit a capital offense. The punishment? Immediate execution. No trial, no appeal, no mercy. But wait, there's a twist that almost nobody knows. The law had a loophole so ridiculous, it nearly caused a civil war. The restriction applied to one type of fabric but not another. This meant wealthy merchants found ways to wear the forbidden color legally, driving actual royalty absolutely insane. Picture angry emperors watching commoners parade around in technically legal versions of their sacred color. Some historians believe this fashion rebellion contributed to the downfall of 3 different provincial governors. The color? Tyrian purple. And yes, people actually died for wearing it. Now, speaking of insane punishments, what if I told you there was a civilization where your own mother could sentence you to death? Law 2. Maternal justice. Imagine you're a warrior returning from battle. You're exhausted, wounded, but alive. You think the worst is behind you. Then you see your mother waiting at the city gates, and your blood runs cold. Because in this society, mothers had ultimate power over their son's fate. This wasn't some primitive tribe. This was one of history's most feared civilizations. Their warriors were legendary, their military tactics studied for centuries. But their most terrifying weapon wasn't spears or shields. It was maternal judgment. Here's how it worked. When young men returned from battle, community elders would investigate their conduct. Did they fight bravely? Did they hold their position? Did they retreat when they should have advanced? But here's the crazy part. The final verdict wasn't up to generals or kings. It was up to their mothers. And these mothers were absolutely ruthless. We're talking about women who would inspect their sons' wounds to determine if they were honorable battle scars or cowardly injuries from running away. They'd interview fellow soldiers, examine weapons, even check the direction of wounds to see if their sons had been fighting or fleeing. The punishments were brutal. Some mothers would refuse to let cowardly sons back into their homes. Others would publicly shame them in town squares. The most extreme cases? Mothers would demand their own sons commit suicide to restore family honor. There are documented cases of mothers literally disowning their children, forcing them into exile, or worse, actively participating in their execution. But here's what's truly insane. This system actually worked. The fear of maternal disappointment created some of history's most fearless warriors. Soldiers would charge into impossible odds rather than face their mother's judgment. Battle cries weren't about glory or conquest. They were about not disappointing mom. There's a famous saying from this culture, "Come back with your shield, or on it." That wasn't from generals. That was what mothers told their sons before battle. This was ancient Sparta, and Spartan mothers were more terrifying than any enemy army. But if you think that's harsh, wait until you hear about the civilization that made it illegal to save someone's life. Law 3. The anti-hero law. You're walking by a river when you hear screaming. Someone's drowning, arms flailing desperately above the water. Every instinct tells you to jump in and save them. But in this ancient civilization, that heroic act would destroy your entire life. This wasn't some barbaric society. This was one of the world's most advanced civilizations. They had incredible art, sophisticated philosophy, and technology centuries ahead of their time. But they had one belief so backwards, it sounds like it came from an alternate universe. They believed everything happened for a divine reason. If someone was drowning, choking, or dying in an accident, the gods had decided their fate. To interfere with divine will wasn't just disrespectful, it was cosmic treason. But here's where it gets really twisted. The law wasn't just about letting people die. There was a punishment so severe, it made death seem merciful. If you saved someone the gods had marked for death, you became spiritually responsible for them forever. Their debts? Now yours. Their family problems? Your responsibility. Their future crimes? Your fault. You'd essentially become their guardian slave for life. This created some absolutely insane situations. Poor people would deliberately hang around dangerous areas, hoping wealthy individuals would have accidents they could heroically prevent. It became a twisted form of social climbing. Poverty-stricken families would scout out rich drowning victims. But the wealthy caught on quickly. They started hiring professional swimmers to follow them around. Some even traveled with personal rescue guards whose job was to prevent anyone else from saving them if they got into trouble. The situation became so ridiculous that the government had to create official divine intervention inspectors, people whose job was to determine if an accident was truly divine will or just bad luck. Some of history's most detailed legal documents are arguments about whether a specific drowning was God-mandated or coincidental. This was ancient China's Tang dynasty. And yes, being a hero was literally illegal. Speaking of water, the next law involves something even weirder. What happens when lawmakers got really, really drunk? Law 4. The Double Jeopardy Drunk Law. Imagine a parliament where getting drunk isn't just allowed, it's required by law. Where every major decision has to be made twice. Once sober, once completely wasted. This actually happened, and it created some of the most bizarre legislative sessions in human history. This ancient civilization had a problem with their lawmakers. When sober, they made boring, practical decisions about taxes and trade regulations. When drunk, they made passionate, emotional laws about justice and human rights. The solution? Require both perspectives for every law. Here's how it worked. Any law passed while sober had to be reconsidered while the entire parliament was drunk. Any law passed while drunk had to be reconsidered while completely sober. The logic was actually brilliant. They believed both states of mind revealed different truths about human nature and governance. But the practical reality was absolutely insane. Picture dozens of lawmakers getting systematically drunk to debate the same bill they just argued about sober. Some sessions lasted for days, alternating between wine and water, with scribes trying to record increasingly incoherent but surprisingly insightful debates. They had to hire professional wine stewards to ensure proper intoxication levels. Too sober, and the drunk session was invalid. Too drunk, and nobody could remember what they were voting on. The weirdest part? Some of history's most progressive laws came from these drunk deliberations. Laws protecting slaves, expanding women's rights, even early environmental protections, all emerged from wine-soaked parliamentary sessions. Apparently, alcohol made lawmakers more compassionate and forward-thinking. But there was one law they could never agree on, drunk or sober. It involved marriage regulations, and the disagreement was so intense that entire families would flee the country rather than risk the penalty. Parliamentary records show the same marriage law being debated over 200 times without resolution. The reason? The punishment was so severe that even drunk lawmakers couldn't bring themselves to finalize it. This was ancient Persia, and their drunk parliament system actually worked better than most sober governments. But speaking of marriage, the next law turned wedding planning into literal gambling. Law 5. The Marriage Math Law. You've found the love of your life. Perfect compatibility, family approval, even a dowry agreement. Everything's set for the wedding. There's just one problem. This year's dice roll says your marriage is illegal. Let me explain this insanity. This ancient civilization had a bizarre obsession with numerical harmony. They believed the gods communicated through numbers, patterns, and mathematical relationships. Everything from building construction to military strategy was based on numerical omens. But they took this obsession to absolutely ridiculous extremes when it came to marriage. Every year, on the spring equinox, government officials would perform a sacred ceremony involving dice, astrology charts, and complex mathematical calculations. The result would determine the maximum allowable age gap between spouses for that entire year. 7 years 1 year, 3 the next, sometimes even 25. Completely random, completely binding, and completely insane. This created absolute chaos in society. Imagine planning to marry someone for months. Then suddenly it becomes illegal because dice said so. Families developed backup marriage plans, contingency spouses, even arranged waiting periods where couples would postpone weddings hoping for better dice next year. Some wealthy families hired professional gamblers and mathematicians to study the dice patterns, trying to predict what next year's number would be. Others attempted to bribe officials to use loaded dice or manipulate the calculations. But the truly insane part was the punishment for violations. Both families would be immediately exiled from the city, and all their property would be confiscated and given to whoever reported the illegal marriage. This created a society of marriage spies, neighbors reporting neighbors, servants betraying masters, even children informing on their own parents. The system became so corrupted that officials discovered nearly 40% of existing marriages were technically illegal according to various years' dice rolls. They faced a choice: exile half their population or grant a massive amnesty. They chose amnesty, but not before the law destroyed thousands of families and created a generation of people terrified of commitment. This was ancient Greece, specifically, a period when mathematical mysticism overruled common sense. Now, if you think that's ridiculous, wait until you hear about the civilization that made it illegal to be too smart. Law 6. The intelligence ban. Picture this. You're in a public debate, making brilliant points, dazzling everyone with your wisdom. The crowd is nodding, your arguments are flawless, and then, you get arrested. Your crime? Being too intelligent in public. This sounds like dystopian fiction, but it actually happened in one of history's most celebrated civilizations. This was the birthplace of democracy, philosophy, and rational thought. Home to history's greatest thinkers, most influential ideas, and most sophisticated political systems. Yet they created a law against excessive public intelligence. Here's how it started. The city's political system relied on public debates where citizens would argue policy, elect leaders, and make collective decisions. It was supposed to be a forum where the best ideas would naturally rise to the top. But then the philosophers showed up. These weren't just smart people. They were intellectual giants who could demolish any argument, expose any logical flaw, and make even the most confident politicians look like babbling children. Public debates became philosophy lectures where regular citizens felt completely outclassed. The politicians fought back with increasingly desperate measures. First, they limited speaking time. Then they required simple language. Finally, they created the most ridiculous law in democratic history, making it illegal to confuse citizens with excessive wisdom during public forums. But here's the twisted part. The definition of excessive wisdom was decided by public vote. Citizens would literally vote on whether someone was too smart to be allowed in political discussions. Imagine democracy deciding that intelligence itself was anti-democratic. This led to some absolutely bizarre situations. Brilliant philosophers would deliberately give wrong answers to appear less threatening. Some hired actors to play dumber versions of themselves in public. Others developed intellectual disguises, dumbing down their vocabulary and pretending to struggle with basic concepts. The punishment was 10 years of exile, the same penalty given to traitors and murderers. The law backfired spectacularly. The city started losing wars because they'd exiled their best strategic minds. Neighboring enemies would actively recruit these banished intellectuals, gaining access to superior military planning, engineering knowledge, and diplomatic expertise. One historian wrote, "The city became so afraid of intelligence, they made themselves stupid by law." This was Athens, the supposed cradle of wisdom and rational thinking. But our final law is so absurd, it makes everything else seem reasonable. It involves something you definitely did this morning. Law 7. The mirror crime. You wake up, stumble to the bathroom, and glance in the mirror to check your appearance. In this ancient society, you just committed a crime punishable by public humiliation. Let me explain this final piece of human insanity. This civilization lived on a remote island, cut off from most of the world. They developed their own unique beliefs, customs, and apparently, their own relationship with reality. They had a terror of reflections that bordered on mass psychosis. The belief started with one person's claim that they saw their reflection move independently in a mirror. Just one person's testimony. But instead of dismissing it as hallucination or mental illness, the entire society embraced this fear as cosmic truth. They developed an elaborate mythology around mirrors and reflections. According to their beliefs, prolonged self-gazing would trap your soul in the mirror world, leaving your physical body vulnerable to demon possession. The longer you looked, the stronger the demons became, until they could completely take over your body. But here's what makes this law absolutely incredible. It applied to everything reflective. Water puddles, polished metal, the surface of certain foods, even highly polished stones. People would cover their soup bowls to avoid accidentally catching their reflection while eating. They'd wear hoods in the rain to prevent seeing themselves in puddles. This created an entire industry of reflection wardens. Professional watchers whose job was to follow citizens around, timing their mirror gazing with hourglasses and shouting warnings when someone approached the legal limit. They became some of the most hated people in society. Nobody wants a stranger timing their bathroom visits. The law became so ridiculous that people started wearing blindfolds in their own homes. Shops couldn't sell mirrors or any reflective objects. Wealthy families would hire servants whose only job was to dress them without letting them see themselves. Some people lived their entire adult lives without knowing what they looked like. The punishment was public humiliation. You'd be forced to walk around town with a bag over your head for a month, becoming a living reminder of the dangers of vanity. But the absolute craziest part? The law created practical problems nobody anticipated. Craftsmen couldn't polish metal properly. Ships couldn't navigate using reflective instruments. Even religious ceremonies became impossible when priests realized holy water showed reflections, technically making every baptism illegal. The law was finally repealed when the island's bishop had a crisis of faith. He couldn't perform baptisms, marriages, or any ceremony involving reflective surfaces without breaking the law. This was medieval Iceland. And for over 200 years, looking at yourself was literally criminal. Hit subscribe if you want more historical insanity that'll make you grateful for today's bureaucracy.